All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing a Week 0 preview and prediction for a game between Fresno State and Kansas going down in Lawrence, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox. 12.5-point line in favor of Kansas, 50.5 is the total. Getting things started with the Fresno offense on this Jayhawk defense. You look at the Bulldogs. This is a team that was really scrappy last year and played a lot of close games. Now they can completely revamp their offense with only two returning starters. They hit the portal hard to get a handful of new guys. And the headliner is going to be E.J. Warner. Of course, his father was a Hall of Fame quarterback. EJ, he's been a 3-year starter. He's got plenty of experience under his belt. 3 years now, 2 at Temple, 1 at Rice. 58 total touchdowns. He has 37 career interceptions. This has been a turnover-prone quarterback. He's got a brand new wide receiver group he's going to be working with. This is a group that does not return a whole lot of guys, so they went and got there's only a couple of guys that caught passes last year, about 3 of them. So pretty much everyone's gone for the Fresno State passing attack. Josiah Freeman, I think, is the guy you're going to key in on, is the guy that's going to step up and potentially be that number one. And the transfers they got really haven't did a whole lot in their career. You look at guys like Ezekiel Avett, Josiah Aon, and Jaleel McClain. Not much to their name in their career, so you're going to be going in here with a very inexperienced wide receiver group. But the good news is that the Kansas secondary is going to lose both of their lockdown starting corners, guys like Kobe Bryant and then Mello Dotson. They depart, so you're going to be looking at an inexperienced group for Kansas as well. It's still a secondary that we still very view to be pretty favorable, though. I think DJ Graham is a solid addition in the portal for the Jayhawks. Jalen Todd's a true sophomore. Jaleel Hurley is a talented player, so I think cornerback's going to be fine, and I'd still give them the nod in that regard. But the return of 0 pass catchers that had 100-plus yards last season with the brand new quarterback could be problematic, Nick, for an offense that really wasn't all that great last year. And they also didn't run the ball very effectively. 98.1 rush yards per game. And I'll talk about the deep defensive line Kansas has here in a second. But what do you make about some of the early, points made here about, a new Fresno offense going up against a, young secondary for Kansas that's also revamped?
I certainly think Fresno State's offense is a weaker unit coming into this season. I don't think they're going to be as strong as they were last year, and they weren't a particularly strong unit. 26.1 points per game last year was what this offense was able to do. They were averaging only 3.3 yards per attempt on the ground, which is certainly a disappointing number if you're a fan. About 5.4 yards per play last season is what Fresno State was able to accomplish. They bring in E.J. Warner, who just, I don't think he's a great quarterback. I don't know if he really can elevate this offense. 60% comp rate last year, 2,700 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 13 picks at Rice. He's bounced around college football. I just don't see him as a long-term guy here. Maybe he's a decent short-term option, but I just don't think this offense is going to be very productive with him under center. The pass-catching group is very shallow. Josiah Freeman could certainly be a good talent at that wide receiver Z position. I think he profiles to be half decent. He did have 2 touchdowns last year, but he only had 8 grabs total last year, right? So he wasn't getting a ton of targets. Jaleel McClain comes in. That's an interesting transfer, in my opinion, a guy from Louisville that I still think has a lot of high upside potential, even though he didn't play a lot last year as a redshirt freshman. That is, he may be a decent asset for this offense, but overall, I think this is an offense that just wasn't super phenomenal. When I take a look at the Kansas defense, I sort of like what I see. They were averaging, the 26 points per game was what they were giving up, which is probably not phenomenal. They gave up 4.7 or 4.47 yards per attempt on the ground as well. 6 total yards per play on offense was their average last year. But I like what they return in the secondary. I like what they bring in the secondary as well. DJ Graham, I think, was a really good add at right cornerback. I think he'll be really solid from Utah State. I like what he was able to do last year at that program. Jalen Todd was a true freshman last year. We saw some signs of progress with him as a younger player. He had 2 pass breakups. He could be decent this year, stepping into a full-time role. The run defense is a very key thing there that will be very solid for this Kansas team, which we'll talk about in a second here.
And the numbers you read about Kansas, they're a little bit skewed because this defense was elite in the back half of the year. Remember that stretch they had beating Iowa State, BYU, Colorado, a 3-game stretch in November to knock all those teams out of the CFP. They ended up getting scorched by Baylor in the season finale. But for a while, this defense was playing really good football. And, they saw some of the top dogs in the conference and played pretty well against most of them. They also played UNLV early on last year as well, so that was a tough offensive scheme to defend. And you look at a Kansas defensive line that I alluded to, I like. It's really deep. I think it's probably the best unit on their team this year. DJ Withers, Dean Miller. You picked up Justice Finkley and Gage Keys returns to town. Those are also seniors, so it's a veteran group. Tommy Dunn at nose tackle, also a veteran of the group. I like what they got at linebacker, Bangali Kamara. Joseph Sipp, Trey Lathan, all guys that were productive in previous destinations at linebacker. So I think this is a defense that can really ascend to this year. And it seems like Kansas is going to force Fresno to be one-dimensional because they didn't run the ball very well last year in the Mountain West. They do have a lead back in Bryson Donaldson, who was pretty impressive last year as a freshman, 500-plus yards and 4 touchdowns. But you're also going to be returning only one starter for an offensive line. It was pretty respectable last year for Fresno, but not one that was over the moon by any means. So I certainly would favor the Kansas defense here, Nick, to have a pretty standout performance. Despite everyone looking at a lot of transfers, again, that Kansas defensive line stands out to me because that's not really a transfer-heavy group, and I know what I'm going to get out of them.
It's a very solid unit. I know some of the stats were a little skewed for them against the run last year, but I think they'll profile to be better against the run this year. I think Dean Miller coming back is a great player. Tommy Dunn, DJ Withers are really talented players. Blake Herhold further down the depth chart's a talented piece as well. Justice Finkley, I think, was a really good add. I think he's a guy that could really do a lot for your team coming from Texas. He was a high-level recruit out of high school. Excited to see what he can do. He's from Hewitt-Trussville, Alabama, a very talented player from that part of the state of Alabama. I like what the linebacking core could do potentially against the run as well for this Kansas team. When I look at the Fresno State offense in terms of running the ball, I think Dolison is a great back, right? Bryson Dolison can really step up and be that number one guy. He was good last year for them. I like what he can do. And I think the O-line is not the worst unit in the world. It's a bunch of new faces, but they're not transfers. They're guys that have been in the program for a little bit, so I think that profiles decently for this Fresno offense. I think if they're going to win this game, it's going to be trying to run the ball. If they're going to keep it close, it's going to have to be through running the ball. I think that's the best way forward, but Kansas is a very strong run defense, so I think they'll be able to stop it and really force some opportunities, potentially force some turnovers as well.
Now I move to the other side of things, the Kansas offense going against that Fresno defense. It was pretty solid last year, 25 points per game. Quality group against the run, 48th nationally outside of the Air Force and UNLV game. I thought the run defense was pretty darn solid. 48th nationally, of course. They're going to return 2 edges in Corey Foreman and Jazon Jacks, so that's certainly impactful for them. It's not a group that returns many starters, though. Both of those guys were standout run defenders, and Kansas, of course, is going to look to try and pound the rock. That's where having a few 290-pounders in the fold for Fresno on the D-line can certainly be helpful. They also got some guys in that 260 range, so rotation might not be as ideal if Kansas is really going to run 40, 50 times in this contest. Again, only 3 starters total back. The other ones being a phenomenal corner, Azilian Hamilton. He was great for them. He does lose his dance partner in Cam Lockridge. The new projected starting Jakari Embry. He was poor last year as a corner. Secondary did help force 15 interceptions, so it was a playmaking bunch, and this was a pretty solid group coming from the Mountain West. Fresno, though, did struggle versus the run last year against those teams who had, variety and slashing ability in its run game. And of course, that's what Kansas is going to be bringing to the table. I think the lack of experience at linebacker might cause them to allow big plays to the boundary. You're looking at a guy who's a veteran at this point in Jalen Daniels, who's a very good runner. He can, make plays on the run with his legs, throwing downfield. I love the addition of LaShawn Williams pairing up with Daniel Highshaw, who's a veteran of the program. This is a great 1-2 punch. I think it's going to be one of the better ones in the country. And so I think with, 4 or 5 guys they picked up in the portal who are expected to be the mainstays in the receiving core, it's a very unproven group for Kansas. So I think they're going to try to focus on running the football in this game. They'll throw it a good bit, but I don't think it'll be the focal point for them, Nick. And I think it's certainly going to be an advantage for them. A lot of the guys they got in the portal are veterans, but haven't played that much. A guy like Emmanuel Henderson, for example, I think, coming from Alabama, still a highly talented player that's going to command a lot of targets. And going up against a guy that I alluded to who's a new starter in that Fresno secondary, could be someone they look to target. Hamilton, though, I know they're not going to want to look his way, Nick. And this is a team that did force 20 takeaways last year. So let's just try and run the football. That 3-headed monster of Williams, Highshaw, and Daniels. And I think we'll have a pretty solid afternoon.
Oh, I think this is absolutely the game plan for Kansas, right? Run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. This is an offense I think can really effectively run the ball and be solid on the ground. Last year, 5.52 yards per attempt on the ground. Really good number there. 5.5 yards per attempt is really solid. Almost, just over 6.5 yards per play on offense, so a really solid, effective number there. I think Jalen Daniels, he'll be really good this year. He's going to step back to his better form. I think he'll be a really solid asset on the ground this year as well. He had 2,400 yards passing last year, 14 touchdowns and 12 picks. He had 6 rushing touchdowns, 439 on the ground. I think he'll be really good on the ground this year. I think they'll find a way to get him involved with design QB runs and really have that big impact. I like what they have as a 1-2 punch in Hinshaw and Williams. I think Williams is a phenomenal add out of the portal from Iowa. He's a guy that could really step up and be a good back for this team after having a quiet year last year, while Daniel Hinshaw is a very talented player they return who I think could be really good in the red zone as well. I expect this team to run the ball a lot. I think this Fresno State defense could be a little bit weak against the run at times. They had some strength last year. I do like what they returned, but I think there are some new faces there potentially at defensive tackle that could be a bit of a liability. Same deal at linebacker with a completely revamped linebacking core for this Fresno State defense. When I look at the Fresno State secondary, I agree with your assessment there, right? I'm not targeting Hamilton. That kid is just absolutely incredible. 13 pass breakups, 2 picks last year for Zillion Hamilton. He's a phenomenal asset, but they bring in a new corner piece on the right side in Embre, who didn't really play a whole lot last year. What could he look like? He's probably gonna be the guy you want to target. I think you're gonna run the ball a lot if you're Kansas here. You're gonna follow your O line that should be pretty solid this year. You're gonna run the ball ground and pound, get some design QB runs for Jalen Daniels, and don't really push that new wide receiving core to the limit. Let them get comfortable. Let them get comfortable with each other, and kind of develop that throughout the season. A big, heavy ground attack approach. I think it makes a lot of sense for Kansas here.
100% when it comes to the Kansas passing attack. I don't think they'll be too aggressive trying to break in that new receiving core, or at least put the ball in harm's way, trying to make things happen. So I think it's going to be a more of a cohesive attack where you're not seeing too much aggression in them trying to put the football in harm's way. You look at that offensive line led by 2 returning starters, center Bryce Foster, right guard Kobe Baines. Those guys were tremendous last year, and I think the rest of the group, they do a pretty good job of developing them. So the offensive line, I think, is a big advantage for them as well. That's going to lead us to the final analysis and the prediction. Both of these teams are kind of following the same recipes. They are trying to break in new pass catchers. One gets a new quarterback. The other is a veteran of the program that understands this scheme. And for Fresno, though, you're looking at guys who haven't had much of a taste at all at the FBS level. And the run game, I don't think is going to bail them out any. I think both teams were tough as hell last year. Newman's leading the Bulldogs out of the tunnel. I like Matt Entz, but it's hard to really envision, potentially the same philosophy right off the bat. I think he is a really good coach, though. I like Kansas. It's run game and the inability for Fresno to move the ball in this game. I think Kansas will cover. I would probably stay away from the total because I think 1 or 2 turnovers could certainly lead to that being cashed as an over. But I think this is going to be a game where Kansas looks to slow it down. Fresno's not going to move the ball all that much, and Kansas is going to want to avoid putting the ball in harm's way, Nick, to keep this game potentially close in favor of the Bulldogs. So I think that's what we're going to see here. A game that's going to go by quick. They're going to slow it down, run the football, pound the rock, and that's going to be how this one plays out. 31-13 for me. Nick also has them scoring only 13, with 28 for the Jayhawks, about 4 touchdowns there. So I think this one, pretty clear vision on it. I think the best bet for the afternoon is going to be Kansas to cover that spread. I'd play it all the way up to 14.
Yeah, I like Kansas to cover the spread. I think 12.5, 13, I think makes a lot of sense. I cut a little bit close here with 15, but I still think they'll get the job done at the end of the day. I actually like the under a lot here at 51.5. I think these two teams will potentially score less than what I put on the board. I was being a little more lenient, giving them some points. I do think that this is going to be a chew clock sort of game where they're just going to run the ball a ton. That will keep the clock moving. They'll avoid turnovers, and that way you'll end up getting that under 51.5 hitting come the end of the day here. I do like what this team can do on the board in terms of Kansas. I think the offense has some talented pieces. I think they'll be able to run the ball effectively here. I like the O-line. I like the quarterback in Jalen Daniels, who's a veteran, who's been around the program for a while. I just don't trust that wide receiving core. I think they'll be fine come the end of the season, but early on in week 0, it's hard to trust a completely new, revamped, transfer portal heavy wide receiving room. I just can't really get behind that. I think it will be fine come the end of the season, but I do think Kansas's recipe here is going to be run the ball. Fresno State's probably going to run the ball a lot as well. I just don't think they'll be able to do it as effectively. And I bet E.J. Warner has a turnover or 2, which will swing the momentum in the right way for Kansas. I think Fresno State will be fine come the end of the season. I think Matt Entz was a good hire. He had some success at North Dakota State. Well, a lot of success at North Dakota State. He was also bounced around a couple different high-level programs and got some roles there. I think he'll be a fine coach for this team. And they'll be okay in the Mountain West come the end of the season. But I think week 0, it's going to be tough to put it together here, transitioned under a new head coach, trying to figure out what philosophy you want to do. I think there's just too many question marks on the defense with new faces right now for me to be confident in the Bulldogs on the road in a new stadium for Kansas technically as well. They hadn't played in the stadium last year as the Jayhawks completely rebuilt it. It looks absolutely phenomenal. They did a phenomenal job on the renovation down there in Lawrence. I'm excited to see what it looks like on TV for week 0. Should be a pretty good matchup to get us started on Fox.
That's me for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.